why do you think that women have particularly been disproportionately affected by these floods?
Women generally, women and children, are disproportionately affected by any natural disaster or calamity that happens, just off the basis of their role or their situation in society.
Do you think feminism is the key to improving the social, cultural, economic, and political status of women in Pakistan?
Absolutely, because if we're talking about the true meaning of feminism, if we're talking about the feminism that is talking about equal rights and opportunities for men and women, if it is talking about equality between the sexes, then of course that is exactly what you need for to bring, because who, again, as you said earlier, who's better positioned to talk about women's issues than women themselves?
Zunaira, previously we saw mostly poverty-stricken and uneducated women be targets of gender-based violence. But in the recent incidents of Noor Muqaddam, we saw that actually no woman in any social strata is safe. So what can we do to change that?
These incidents are happening in every tier of society. They're happening in every house. I think the case was so gruesome that it actually brought forward, and that conversation started that, okay, it can happen in these societies, it can happen in this sector, it can happen in this city.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good evening. I'm Michelle Mohiyudin and today I'm in conversation with Zunaira Inam Khan. Zunaira Inam is a research analyst and she's also the head of the Afghanistan program at the Institute of Regional Studies. She has also previously taught at the Quaid-e-Azam University in Islamabad and she speaks passionately about human rights and women's rights. Thank you, Zunaira. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to be here today.
Zunaira, since you are working with a well-known think tank of Pakistan, I want to know what is the vision of our academia when it comes to safeguarding the human rights in our country?
It's really interesting that you asked that, because beforehand, I think we had a very strict, rigid idea about traditional security, and that's what all academia and our government was focusing on. But then you saw the national security policy come out there right now, I think last year. And in that, you see that this focus is shifting towards non-traditional security. And then you had the security dialogue that happened and all of that. And because what we're coming to realize now is that without human security, without providing people that holistic security, you cannot have traditional security, because people will not feel safe if they don't have a safe environment, if their health is not looked after, if their rights aren't given to them, if they don't have economic security, climate change, all of this, it all factors into how safe your society is.
I'm going to take this opportunity to also talk about minority rights. It's a subject that I feel quite strongly about, and in our country, it's no secret that the minorities have traditionally been marginalized in Pakistan. So how do you feel that what can we do to ensure that their rights are safeguarded and they're treated as equal Pakistani citizens in Pakistan?
So, I think sometimes people overlook the fact that the rights exist in the Constitution. You have representation, you have freedom of religious practice, you have all of these freedoms that are granted to our minorities. But over time, they have been overlooked, or because of multiple reasons, multiple, advantages, whether it was political, whether it was other, people have overlooked minority rights or used it for different platforms, abused them for different platforms. And that's why you see that, when it comes to minority, especially minority women, you will only see that there are like 2 or 3% of them which would probably be in academia or professors or doctors, and 80% of the sanitation workers in Pakistan are Christians, which is a really sad reality. So I think that one of the most important things that needs to be done is that you need to make sure that the constitutional rights that have been granted to these minorities are being provided to them. And if they're not being provided, I think it is our duty and our responsibility to talk about it. Why aren't we granting our minorities the rights that our constitution gives them? So that's something that I think that it really is also an individual responsibility to hold your government accountable, hold your provincial governments accountable, that why are we not providing these rights to minorities? Because everyone deserves to live their lives in a certain comfortable, safe environment.
Okay, in my survey, and I've visited quite a lot of areas where minorities are living in concentration, and I've really noticed something, that basic necessities are still to this day, whether it's electricity or gas, in a lot of those areas, they're still not present. Like, they're not given, the government hasn't really worked on that.
It's unfortunate, but I think it's sort of like a ghettoization which has happened, and you see that in Islamabad as well, right? You have Quarter, French Colony. These are all, most of our domestic help comes from these areas, and these are massive living areas where majority are Christians, right? And it's really disturbing when you go and you visit them, or if you go and just look around, the sanitation, the health, the conditions that they're living in.
The areas have been completely majorly neglected for years,
and this
decades.
is F7, this is F6. These are prime sectors where we are seeing houses which are mansions. We're seeing people living comfortably, and then you have this happen, and it's just not a priority. It's just honestly not a priority for anyone at this point.
Tell me, why do feminism and feminist slogans get so much flack in our country? And I've seen that a lot of that flack is coming from liberal, educated, westernized men, Pakistani men. Why is that?
Okay, it's a bit controversial, because every time the name Aurat March comes up, every time these slogans come up, there's such a polarization that you see, where people don't even want to listen to what the topic is. And I think mainly, it's misrepresentation. I think it's a lot of propaganda. I think it's manipulation or of the slogans themselves. And I feel that a lot of what is being talked about is basic human rights. However, what we hear in the media, whether it's social media, whether it's even a lot of mainstream media, you kind of think that what they're trying to do, which you hear a lot of from these liberal men, is that, they want to, wear certain types of clothes, or they want to, go do certain types of things in society which will not be acceptable, or which are, will spread obscenity or vulgarity or whatever. But what actually it comes down to is that when you hear these slogans as well, even the concept behind these slogans themselves is not really how obscene you've made them to be. So, one of the most controversial ones that you have is Mera Jism Meri Marzi. And, what really, I don't know if it's just the word jism that, really makes people like step back and say, this is vulgar. But what it's actually saying is that I should have the same bodily health autonomy that a man has to make decisions about themselves. A woman should be able to make decisions about her own body. A woman should be able to, make decisions about whether to have kids, whether not to have kids, whether to, get a treatment for something. But in our country, and
it's misconstrued.
It's misconstrued, and it's a system, right? If you want to go to the doctor, you have to tell your father, you have to tell your husband, I need to go to the doctor, can you take me? Someone has to go with you, and not for everyone, but you see that especially in certain social backgrounds, you see that there's not that freedom of movement that we see in other places. So I think that it's misrepresented, and I think that narrative has become so strong that this is about vulgarity and obscenity. That's a lot of the marginalized women, and a lot of what the actual purpose of this was, which was basically getting basic human rights for women. I think that's really been overlooked.
I think Bharat March is quite progressive, and I find it very inspiring, and the fact that so many women in large numbers are participating in it. And I think we should continue to have such marches.
And I think it should be supported, because the thing is, you wouldn't be seeing those numbers out on the streets if these weren't actual problems.
I mean, around the world, we are seeing a lot of women-centric movements taking place, whether it's Me Too or Women's March.
Because patriarchy is a universal problem. That's the issue.
So, but in Pakistan, it's often said that the women leading these marches come from very privileged backgrounds, and they have no idea what real women's issues are. Do you think that is correct, or is that just something that people say to kind of discredit this movement altogether?
I have I think two opinions on that. First of all,
Yeah.
yes, a lot of them are from privileged backgrounds because they're the ones who can come out. They're the ones who can organize it. They have they can speak about these things, and their families will let them. But that does not in any way mean that these women don't understand feminist issues or women issues, right? Because this is where intersectional feminism comes in, because you can have women from different ethnicities and backgrounds and socio-religious ethnic backgrounds, but they will all, everyone feels the issues in a different way, but we're all understanding women's issues. So it's not like maybe someone living in, interior Sindh might be facing a different problem, and I might be facing a different problem, but the problems exist because you are a woman. You are not getting the freedom to choose, the freedom to make your own choices, to get an education, to marry who you like, to be able to get medical treatments without getting consent, to have financial independence. So the issues are going to be the same all over, but they impact people differently. And I don't think that if you are a privileged woman and you are talking about marginalized women as well, and unless you're ignoring them and you're just talking about your right to wear whatever you want, and it's not,
I mean, who better can advocate for women than women themselves?
Exactly. And it doesn't matter whether, like, those issues, which is basically your right to live, education, work, those issues should always be paramount. But that doesn't mean that a woman shouldn't be able to talk about whatever issues she's facing just because she comes from a socioeconomic background which we find privileged.
Zunaira, previously we saw mostly poverty-stricken and uneducated women be targets of gender-based violence. But in the recent incidents of Noor Muqaddam, we saw that actually no woman in any social strata is safe. So what can we do to change that?
First of all, I think it's really important to realize, and I think everyone, and what the Noor Muqaddam case actually did was bring forward that these incidents are happening in every tier of society. They're happening in every house. I think the case was so gruesome that it actually brought forward, and that conversation started that, okay, it can happen in these societies, it can happen in this sector, it can happen in this city. But I think it really drove home the fact that it happens everywhere. I think there are like statistics that 1 in 3 women will be domestically abused at some point in their lives in Pakistan, and that is a scary number, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, if you notice that when you talk to people around you, talk to women around you, you will notice how prevalent it is. And I think that what the most important thing for us to do is, first of all, understand what is domestic violence and domestic abuse, because in a lot of cases you'll see women say, oh, he does this lekin marta nahi hai, oh, marta hai lekin thoda marta hai. You see a lot of these justifications.
That narrative is kind of normalized in our society.
It's normalized. Okay, at least he doesn't hit you. At least he doesn't leave marks on you. At least he's not doing what that person's husband did to her. But we need to understand where domestic violence and domestic abuse starts. And we need to have advocacy for that. We need to tell women that if this is happening to you, this is domestic abuse. You need to be raising the red flag. You need to be getting help. You need to be talking to people, or you need to be getting away from situations. We need to be telling them that if these are the signs you're seeing in your partner, it will escalate. Because, if he's hitting you today, bacha karne se, it's not going to get better. If he's screaming at you today and he's smashing things, there are chances that might lead to him being aggressive or violent with you. So there needs to be, first of all, awareness. There needs to be advocacy where you tell people that this is what domestic violence is, and if this happens, you need to get help. And then tell them where to get help. Where should they go if they feel that they're threatened by their partner? They feel that their partner might hit them or has hit them. If they're worried for the safety of their children, who do they call? Which helpline should they call? Which person should they reach out to? So I think telling people those resources is really, really important.
We see a lot of victimization of women in the country. What do you think is the driving force behind this male chauvinism in the country?
You see it all over the world, actually. And I think that that's something that's really interesting, because this the culture of patriarchy exists in every society, every country, and you're going to see it manifest in different ways. And I think that specifically when it comes to Pakistan, it's such traditional power structures which we have then confused them with culture and religion. We're like, oh, this is how it should be. This is how things have always been. It doesn't mean that if that's how it has always been, that that's how it needs to be. We need to be able to understand that some certain power structures need to be dismantled. And, a woman has never been the head of that institute. A woman has never held this post, but why should they not be able to do it? Why are we putting a limit on how far women can go? And especially coming from a country where we had one of the first Muslim prime ministers, and coming so far down that list now where, the gender, I think the gender gap index, we are 145 out of 146. And it's really unfortunate because it's not just these things, okay, we've put a quota here or we've put a woman there. It has to be, you need to be giving women the equal opportunities for education, employment, promotions. That all needs to be done as well.
Okay, one of the arguments raised by men in the country is that women are empowered, that they have the right to vote, that a company has to have a female board member, and that they also have representation in the legislative assemblies. So what are the essential women rights that women need?
I won't disagree that these rights do exist, but having a right written down in a constitution or written down in a book somewhere or in a guidebook somewhere does not mean that we're actually enjoying those rights or those are being implemented.
Those are two different things.
It's very different, right? So we are being told that, you can be the CEO of that company, but how many female CEOs actually are in Pakistan? And you're telling me that we don't have qualified women in this country. We don't have women who could be the CEO of a bank. How many are? So it really is so disappointing to me when we're told that you have all of these rights. But then again, those rights are also being enjoyed by women from certain backgrounds or certain educational levels. How many rural women have the right to say, I'm going to go to university in Karachi, and are being told, haan theek hai beta jao. So those rights exist, yes, but who's going to implement them? We have to implement them. So if we're talking about that we want our rights, we're not saying you haven't given them to us. They have been granted by the constitution of the country. And, even if you want to get into a religious debate, they've been granted to us by God. We've been given rights, but the patriarchal structures don't allow us to enjoy the rights in the way that we want to, or are not letting every woman have the same rights as most men have.
This negative connotation with the word feminism, it has even kind of made women wary of associating themselves with the term feminism. Like they're not comfortable saying I'm a feminist.
Yes, because then you get put into that obscene, characterless category of women who want to do
or men bashing,
men hating. Oh, they just want to wear certain clothes. They just want to do this. They just want to a party. They want to do this. But it's actually not that. I think what we keep forgetting is that at its core, feminism just talks about equal opportunity and equal rights for both sexes. We're not saying we want to be above men. We are not saying we want more opportunities than men. We are saying that we want equal opportunities. And why is that a scary concept? Why is that a negative concept? Why is that something that men hear and say, oh my God, why is she trying to step into a place she shouldn't be in? Why? And it's so funny to me because if this was the same thing, just, like you see this with the hijab ban, a lot of Pakistani men have so much to say about, women protesting it. But it's even tomorrow, if Pakistani government decides that we want every man to have a beard, would you be okay with it? Like, would every man willingly keep a beard, or will there be some backlash or some protest where people be like, we want to wear, like, maybe we don't want a beard. Maybe we want to be clean shaved. Maybe we don't want an enforced mandate of a namazi topi. So it's the same as that. I mean, it's not about whether the hijab is right or wrong. That's a religious argument. It's about if even if a woman wants to wear a hijab, she should have the right to do it. Even if she doesn't want to wear a hijab, she
Either
should have
way
the
should
right
be
to do
respected.
it should be respected. We're not saying that, take off someone's hijab. I'm like, absolutely not. I think that it is, even in my family, my mother wears a hijab, my sister covers up, we've never told them ki nahi aap utaro or aap pehno, so these are the same rights that everyone across the board wants. We want to be able to not wear a hijab or wear a hijab, but not have the government tell you to do it. So the protest is against that. The protest is not against, and that I think is scary to a lot of, to the structures of patriarchy. I think it's scary that women want that autonomy.
Women and children have suffered so much in Afghanistan, and the current Taliban government is not letting young girls go to school or women to work. What will be the impact of this rigidness adopted by the Taliban?
I think for these policies is going to be huge. It is an immense loss for a country when an entire subset of your population is being prevented from going to school. And the thing is, there are a lot of people who a lot of arguments that are given that they haven't stopped university education, they haven't stopped primary education, they're still allowing certain women jobs to be done by women. But the unfortunate aspect is that जो आपका पूरा middle school का section है, there's no schooling happening there. In the next 3 years, women, the last graduates from universities, are going to graduate, and there will be no one to take their place, because you can't jump from primary to university, right? And I think that's something that people really overlook, that after the next 3 years, you will have no more university graduates in Afghanistan, women university graduates. And it's a scary thought, because what happens with that is not just that, oh, you're depriving women of an education. It also impacts every aspect of your society, because after a certain point in the future, you're not going to have women doctors, you're not going to have women engineers, you're not going to have women lawyers. And what the problem with that is, that when a rural woman needs to go to a doctor and her husband says, you cannot go to a male doctor, who does she go to if there are no female doctors in the country, right? It really does filter down through every social segment, and it is going to damage not just the economy, it's going to damage the structure of the society. And just economically, I think the first estimates that were made about women being prevented from working or women being prevented from an education was that 5% of Afghanistan's GDP is being lost just by that policy alone. That's about $1 billion US dollars. Was $1 billion US dollars. And it's just it's an immense loss to your economy, to your country, to your society. It's going to have ramifications for the future, which I don't think people are realizing right now.
Do you see any end to the hardships that the women in Afghanistan are facing?
Under the current policies, no. I think that, we do see, the Taliban, it has been argued before, are not as hardline as they were when they came to power in the 90s. And you do see certain flexibility in their statements or what their spokespersons say, but I do think that they're hardliners still within the ranks of the Taliban. And I think that one of the most important things that needs to be done by the international community, every time you are having any sort of an interaction, a transaction, a business transaction with Afghanistan, this needs to be topmost in your agenda. Open the schools, open the schools, open the schools. Like, it needs to be constantly on the top of your agenda, because otherwise you're doing a great disservice to the country.
Things also don't seem to be really good for women in India who belong to a certain caste. Why do you think the world is turning a blind eye to the atrocities in India?
The unpopular answer to that is just that they're huge economically. They are a force to be reckoned with. And I think that we are a bit like that ostrich with the head in the sand. We don't want to accept how massive India has become as an economy. I think they're the fifth largest now, the fifth largest economy in the world. With science, they're doing amazing things with technology. Some of the largest companies' CEOs are Indian origin. You have a vice president of the US who has Indian origins. You have a prime minister of the UK who's Indian origin, and and how are we competing with that? And the issue isn't even the competition. The issue is that till they have so much influence just on the basis of science and technology and economy, you will see that the international community is not going to follow your narrative. We will not be able to get them to talk about the human rights violations in India because capitalism and money matters more.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Unfortunately.
There exists a gap between, the international conventions and what is socially, culturally, and religiously accepted in our country. So, what can we do to bridge this gap?
So I think, again, it has to be about advocacy and awareness. We need to understand that the international conventions that we are a party to have been accepted by our parliament, our houses, like Senate. All of these have to be on board before these conventions are signed and ratified, which essentially means that they don't go against the spirit of your religion or your culture because everyone has signed off on it. And I think that we again, it's like propaganda that is sold to the people, where it's said that, oh, they want to do this, they want to change our society, they want to change our culture. But what are the conventions that we've signed on to which go against the spirit of our religion? There is absolutely none. If you're talking about rights of the child, if you're talking about human trafficking, if you're talking about women, domestic abuse of women, how does that go against your religion? It does not. So I just find it really strange when that is used as an argument, where these conventions, because religiously, socially, culturally, we are told that we are given even more rights than what the West offers its women, right? So then why are these conventions bothering us?
They say that women's active political participation could really stabilize democracy, and it could also boost the economic development of our country. Do you think this is true, keeping the socioeconomic realities of the Pakistani society in mind? And do you think that the gender quotas really benefit our politics?
Equal representation, I think, is a great thing if used effectively. And in countries like ours, where we already have that sort of gender gap, gender quotas are a very effective way of giving women representation in parliament or in politics. However, I understand where the criticism for that comes from, because in Pakistan specifically, you see a lot of these quotas being misused for political affiliations, kinship. You see family members being put into these gender quotas. But I still think that it is really, really important, and it's a good thing, because you cannot have a broad representative form of politics if half your population is not being represented effectively. But I think one of the most important things that I think we need to do in the future, and that's a political thing, so the government needs to come up with solutions for that. But I think if all political parties are given a quota for the amount of women that needs to be on their ballots, not just the women who come to parliaments through quotas, even electables jo aapke hain, if their ballot pay, there needs to be a certain amount of women's names that should be there, like maybe 1/3 of your electable candidates should be women. And if it's done by all parties, then women will be voted in as well. Now you see this problem that, okay, if a PTI candidate is a woman, but JUIF will be a man. Or if PPP is a man, you will see the PMLN ki candidate was a woman, and then sometimes people might just vote for the man because they don't want to vote for the woman. But if both candidates that are contesting the elections are women, people won't have a choice but to choose one of them, right? Yeah. So I think it's really important to get the names on the ballots.
And that's an interesting suggestion.
Yeah, right, thank you.
Do you think feminism is the key to improving the social, cultural, economic, and political status of women in Pakistan?
Absolutely, because if we're talking about the true meaning of feminism, if we're talking about the feminism that is talking about equal rights and opportunities for men and women, if it is talking about equality between the sexes, then of course that is exactly what you need to bring, because who, again, as you said earlier, who's better positioned to talk about women's issues than women themselves? Who's better to talk about marginalized communities than someone who actually belongs to a community like that, right? So it's really, really important, and especially for our country. But I personally feel that a lot of change has come, and I think that a lot of awareness has come. At least these are conversations that are happening now about feminism, about women's role in politics.
And that it's a really interesting time that we are living in, when we can have these kind of conversations very
Exactly.
openly, and they're being talked about.
Yeah, so I just find that very fascinating.
And even men are taking an active role in these discussions and are advocating for women and women's rights. So what are the reasons, I'm curious to know, what are the reasons that are responsible for Pakistan being ranked as the second worst country in the world when it comes to gender inequality? Despite Pakistan's commitment to many international conventions and also strong commitment to gender equality in our constitution.
I think it again all boils down to implementation. You're not implementing the laws that you are making. You're not implementing the policies that you're making. So you are not focusing. You're saying every child has to go to school, but are you enforcing that? How many kids are actually going to school? If just like a ballpark figure, there's 23 million children who are not going to school. If that's actually true, then even though childhood education is compulsory under the constitution, if we're not implementing that, then do we actually have that right that we're giving to our kids? We're saying they have the right to an education, but are you actually implementing that right? So I think it's a matter of implementation.
The process of globalization has really connected the world together and has turned the world into a global village and really made us aware of where we are lacking when it comes to women's rights. So do you think that this globalization, how much of this has had a positive impact on Pakistani women and women's rights in Pakistan?
So I think that when we're talking about globalization in the sense of awareness that it has brought, I think it's a good thing. I think that living in a bubble where you don't know that you don't have rights is not, I would not prefer that. I would prefer to live in an environment where even if I'm deprived of rights, I know I'm deprived, so I can do something about it. So I'm actually glad that we have these conversations now, and I'm glad that there are people who have access to this information. And I think just because of the internet or the media or social media, women are aware now of what rights exist for them. And I think that knowledge, in whatever sense it comes to you, I don't think it's a bad thing ever. I mean, you can choose to adopt the bad things, you can choose to adopt the good things, but I think that awareness in itself isn't bad, and I think that it's necessary. That's the only way forward, because you have to be aware of your situation before you try to change it.
I also want to talk about the recent floods that have taken the country by a storm, and they've really devastated a lot of the people, and a lot of people are still suffering and probably will continue to suffer for quite a while. But why do you think that women have particularly been disproportionately affected by these floods?
Women and children are disproportionately affected by any natural disaster or calamity that happens, just off the basis of their role or their situation in society. And this was the same thing that was seen when the tsunami came. This was the same thing that we saw when the earthquake came, that women and children are exponentially more affected. I think they're 14 times more likely that women and children will die in a natural disaster than men will.
Yeah, they're more vulnerable.
And yeah, they're more vulnerable. And it's because of a multitude of reasons. Firstly, I think in our country, it has a lot to do with that concept of char diwari and honor, where a lot of people didn't want their women to leave the house and just go and start living in a field somewhere. And they weren't able to escape the flood. waters, right? There's a lot of situations where they'll get more diseases or they'll die of bad sanitation because it's possible that medical help is far away and they can't travel those distances alone. They need a man to take them. Or even if the man can't take them, they don't have transport, they're not able to do it. So you see this a lot. And then, when medical help is not available, so you see that with a lot of women. I think there were like 500,000 or 600,000 women who were pregnant who were flood affected.
Yeah.
What kind of care will be given to them when they're having a child? What kind of post birth care will be given to them? And that all impacts how they survive or how they're affected. So a lot of times you'll see that with joblessness, homelessness, when people feel frustrated in their situation, they will take it out on women. And that's why during the COVID-19 lockdowns, the domestic violence surged. And you will see that with flood and natural disasters as well, that domestic violence, domestic abuse will surge because that frustration will be taken out in the house. And that's not just with women, it will also be seen with children.
Do you have any suggestions for how, as our government or policy makers should probably maybe have different bodies set up in place when it comes to disaster management to highlight women's needs and women issues when any disaster strikes our country, especially in rural areas? And because basically people privately and women privately are going out and helping women, and they're the ones who are actually aware of very women-centric issues, like you mentioned, like women who are pregnant or otherwise.
I think I agree with you that that is important and that should be a priority. I think not just our government, I think it's also just generally it's a mindset in people that these are minor issues. Pehle logon ko khana mil jaye, let them survive, let's save people, then we'll talk about pregnant mothers or feeding mothers or people who might be having sanitation issues or whatever. But these are major issues for women, because I think, and this was also something that we saw with the whole period justice movement that started happening, because they're not really understanding that when you're a flood affectee, you don't have a house, you don't have access to clean bathrooms, you don't have access to any sort of thing that you can use.
And women just generally also need more privacy when it comes to these things.
Absolutely, you need privacy and you need hygiene and sanitation. You cannot you can, but most women do not want to go into a field and just use the bathroom as most men can. So there's a certain level, and not just because it's a privacy issue, it's also a security issue. It's a security risk for a woman to just be that vulnerable in a field somewhere, right? So these are things that I think people don't really value. Providing flood affectees dignity, providing them security, privacy, health, safety.
Yeah.
These are all important issues, and I think that we don't give them the same importance as we do that. First it's more important to give them food. It is important to give them food, but it is also important and to make sure that they have resources and have that access to sanitary healthcare and hygiene and clean environments. That's also as important.
So Naira, in the end, I want to know if there's just one thing that you could do for women in Pakistan, what would that be?
I think the most important thing to me, which I think we keep coming back to, is education. Education is so vital, not just for women, also for men, because I think we have a really low literacy rate. But in a country like ours, literacy rate is also, it's judged on a very low standard. And I think that what's really important is that, you have put it in your constitution that children need to go to school. But out of those 23 million kids that are not in school, just in Sindh, I think 58% of women, 58% of girls are not in school. In Balochistan, 78% of girls are not in school. And that again,
That
like
number really adds up.
similar to how we spoke about Afghanistan, these are trickle down effects, right? You are depriving that generation from an education. They will not have education. They will not have financial independence then, because
They
they
won't
can't
know
get
their
jobs.
rights.
They don't know their rights. They're not aware of what they can or they can't do. They don't have access to a high paying job. They will not have access to money of their own. And then it's not just that it impacts their freedom, it impacts how your next generation is raised, because these same women are mainly, and let's be honest, mostly it's a woman's job to raise a kid.
Yeah.
And
And that's the generation of tomorrow.
exactly,
That
they're raising the
Yeah.
generation of tomorrow, but you are depriving them of enough information where they could kind of instill those principles or those concepts or those rights in the next generation. So I think it's a great loss.
Thank you so much, Zunaira. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much.
You raised some interesting points, and thank you so much for joining us in this episode. If you like our content, do like and share, and also subscribe to our channel. Till next week, I'll see you again.